In absolute silence, a massive FAB-3000 glide bomb plummeted toward a fortified underground bunker in Donbas. No air raid sirens preceded it. No American F-35s appeared to intercept it. No electronic countermeasures deflected it. The sky above the Eastern Front was empty in a way it had never been empty before. And that emptiness, that terrifying, unprecedented absence, was not an accident. It was a policy decision made thousands of miles away, and it was a signal that changed everything. A classified cable from Brussels, leaked to multiple European defense ministries within hours of its transmission, confirmed what NATO's most senior planners had feared for months. Under Washington's new strategic doctrine, the United States had issued a formal ultimatum to the alliance. America would cut its deployed fighter jets in Europe by one-third. It would reduce its strategic bomber presence by 50%, and it would completely withdraw its submarine commitments from European waters. The specifics were not a negotiating position. They were a final decision. Europe had 48 hours to acknowledge receipt. The free shield, the arrangement that had underwritten European security for 70 years, was being withdrawn, and Europe would have to pay for its own replacement. The consequences were not theoretical. They were immediate. At U.S. air bases across Western Europe, Ramstein, Lakenheath, Aviano, the visible change was not the aircraft already parked on the tarmac. It was the reserve forces that quietly disappeared from the deployment lists. Entire squadrons of F-35s, F-15E Strike Eagles, and F-16s, units designated for rapid reinforcement of NATO's eastern flank in the first hours of crisis, were removed from the alert roster without public announcement. What disappeared with them was something that cannot be replaced quickly: the suppression of enemy air defense capability that only American electronic warfare aircraft and fifth-generation fighters can provide at scale. The real-time intelligence integration that only U.S. C4ISR networks can deliver across the full depth of a European theater. And the credible conventional deterrent that had kept Russian air power on its side of the line for decades. Without those capabilities, NATO's eastern flank was not just weaker, it was fundamentally different. And Moscow understood the difference before the ink on the cable was dry. Geopolitics does not tolerate a vacuum. The Kremlin's assessment of the situation was completed within 24 hours of the Brussels cable. Russian military doctrine has always been built around identifying and exploiting moments of structural weakness, moments when an adversary's capability gap is real, not manufactured, and when the political will to close that gap is absent. This was that moment. Overnight, the posture of Russian air power over Ukraine changed in ways that were visible from satellite imagery within 48 hours. Su-34 and Su-35 fighter bombers that had been flying cautious, defensive profiles at low altitude to avoid engagement with American interceptors, were suddenly operating at high altitude over strategic corridors they had avoided for 2 years. The eastern sky, which had been contested and dangerous, became a Russian operating environment. From 60 to 70 miles behind the front line, beyond the range of Ukrainian air defenses, Russian pilots began releasing FAB-3000 guided glide bombs with UMPK wing kits in steady, methodical sequences. Fortified bunkers that Ukraine had spent a decade constructing across the Donbas defensive network began disappearing one by one. The FAB-3000 carries enough explosive energy to destroy a reinforced concrete structure to a depth of 30 meters. It does not need precision when the target is underground infrastructure the size of a city block. It simply needs to arrive. And now, without American interceptors threatening to launch aircraft, it always arrived. In the Baltic Sea, the second consequence of the withdrawal became visible within weeks. A NATO logistics convoy, civilian vessels carrying critical military supplies under naval escort, was struck by a salvo of Kalibr cruise missiles launched from a submerged Kilo-class submarine operating in waters where, 6 months earlier, a U.S. Virginia-class attack submarine would have been sitting in ambush. The Virginia-class is the reason Russian submarines have been operating cautiously, carefully, defensively in European waters for years. A Virginia-class boat can detect a Kilo at ranges the Kilo cannot detect a Virginia. It can follow it, track it, and if authorized, kill it before the Kilo's crew knows it has been found. remove the Virginia from the water, and the Kilo class becomes what its crews call among themselves the Black Hole, nearly silent, nearly invisible, free to move. The Pentagon had not removed the Virginia submarines from European waters because the European theater was no longer important. It had removed them because a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz had demanded their immediate deployment to the Persian Gulf, where Iran's naval forces were threatening the global oil supply. The decision was rational, given the competing priorities. Its consequences in the Baltic were catastrophic regardless. The withdrawal of U.S. strategic bombers completed the picture. Since the 1960s, NATO's entire defense philosophy had been built on what planners call flexible response, the doctrine that conventional invasion would be met with overwhelming conventional retaliation from American strategic bombers before any consideration of nuclear options. The B-52H Stratofortress and the B-1B Lancer were not just aircraft. They were the credible conventional punishment that made Russian military planners calculate the cost of escalation in numbers they could not accept. When Washington reduced its European bomber presence by 50%, the Kremlin did not need to run new calculations. It already knew what the numbers meant. The large-scale conventional threat of retaliation from the West had effectively disappeared. Russia could escalate in the European theater without facing the overwhelming long-range conventional response that had deterred it for 60 years. And so it did. Kinzhal hypersonic missiles and Iskander cruise missiles began striking deep into Ukrainian rear areas, logistics hubs, railway junctions, the supply corridors connecting Poland to the front. These were targets that had been largely protected not by Ukrainian air defenses, which could not reliably intercept hypersonic weapons, but by the deterrent presence of American strategic assets that made the cost of using them too high. That deterrent was now halved. The strikes continued without the escalatory response that would previously have followed within hours. Europe's awakening was brutal, and it came too late to prevent the immediate damage. Germany's Rheinmetall factories shifted to 24-hour production cycles. Poland began the largest military procurement program in its history. The Baltic states began emergency consultations about independent air defense architecture. But the fundamental problem remained. Modern military capability cannot be built in weeks or months. An Aegis Ashore installation costs over $1 billion and takes years to construct. Operating an F-35 costs $35,000 per flight hour, and Europe does not have enough of them to cover the gap left by the American withdrawal. The choice facing European governments was existential and immediate. Cut welfare spending and social programs to fund defense at 3.5% of GDP, a level that would represent the largest peacetime military buildup in European history. Or accept a strategic position where Russian military pressure would continue to grow faster than European defense capability could respond. At the Suwalki Gap, the 40-mile land corridor between Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad exclave that represents NATO's most vulnerable geographic point, Russian forces began conducting exercises that were not plausibly deniable as routine training. The scenarios practiced openly included rapid encirclement operations designed to test whether Article 5, NATO's mutual defense commitment, would still trigger an American military response at a moment when Washington was simultaneously managing the Strait of Hormuz, the Taiwan Strait, and the domestic political consequences of its own European withdrawal. The Kremlin was not testing Ukraine's defenses at the Suwalki Gap. It was testing NATO's political will. And the answer it was receiving from Washington was ambiguous, in a way it had never been ambiguous before. What happens next depends on two things that history will judge with complete clarity. Whether Europe can build genuine military self-sufficiency fast enough to close the gap before Russian pressure finds a point it cannot hold, and whether Washington's strategic pivot, brutal, cold, and calculated, turns out to have been the shock therapy that finally forced the alliance to grow up, or the fatal hesitation that gave an adversary the opening it had been patiently engineering for a decade. The FAB 3,000 that fell in silence over Donbas did not fall because Russia became stronger. It fell because a shield was removed. And the only question that matters now is whether Europe can build a new one before the next bomb finds a target that cannot be rebuilt.